Guys, how's it going? It's Al. My top 10 wide receiver rankings for 2022 fantasy football. This is the video. It's pre-NFL draft, so this video is probably going to get redone as the summer goes along. I'll do another version somewhere around the beginning of August that's going to have an updated view based on changes that happened throughout free agency, at the draft, injuries, and everything else. But a lot of the change has been done already. Free agency is mostly finished. We kind of know where people are going to slot in the draft. Quarterbacks have moved teams. That carousel is done. So we have a really good snapshot right now. I'm recording this video on April the 6th, a few weeks before the NFL draft. There's going to be some changes. There's a few really good wide receivers that are going to end up somewhere on certain teams, but they're not really going to affect the alphas. So the top 10 is pretty much where the top 10 is. It's going to be interesting to see, though, over the summer how ADPs change. And I've got some ADP data for you guys, and it's not going to be the same as what my top 10 is. So it's interesting to look at that versus where I rank them. I want to know what your top 5 is at the position. Put that down below in the reply. Make sure you drop a like on the video. Welcome to the Fantasy Football channel. We need you all to subscribe here as we chase 1,000 subs to really start to launch this channel. Make sure that you ring the notifications bell because I'm going to be publishing 2 to 3 or more videos throughout the summer on this channel here for season-long Dynasty and everything else best ball related. So thank you all for being here, and let's go.
He's a legend.
Underdog Fantasy has all of your best ball needs right now. Before the draft, they're running a rookies and sophomore draft. They've got added super flex, and as you know, after the draft they add all of their best ball mania and the puppy drafts, which are like the big prize pool tournament drafts that they have with like $1 million to first place. So they've been running real money drafts all throughout the, since the playoffs started. So we've got some actual real money ADP data for these. This is what the top 10 or top 12 looks like right now of where players have been drafted so far, but some changes have been made. If you wanted to make a new account, you get something for free, whether it's $25 or $100. That deposit bonus is going to change on your first deposit depending on what date it is. So I can't tell you exactly what the promo is right now. The last one that I know of was a deposit match up to $100 if you use the code Smizzle, all one word, on your first deposit over at Underdog Fantasy. So go check that out. And let's get to my top 10. Number 1, guess what? It's Cooper Kupp. He's really good. An absolute absurd amount of volume last year. His ADP right now is 3.2. He is basically the third player off the board behind the 2 running backs all the way at the top. 1,900 receiving yards, 16 touchdowns, 145 catches. He had 192 targets last year, and while that offense does not predict to change all that much, there's going to be some pieces that come in and some pieces that go out. So like Odell Beckham Jr. out, Allen Robinson in. That's not really going to change all that much. Robert Woods out. He was out for the second half of the season, replaced by Odell Beckham Jr. Van Jefferson's still there. Higbee still there. This is a highly reliant offense on Cooper Kupp running in the slot and sometimes lining up outside. It's going to be tough to duplicate that 192 targets. It was 22 more than like the second place target getter in the league, but this offense is based around getting the ball to Cooper Kupp in space, and they scheme to get him open as often as possible. He was an absolute monster last year. Double-digit targets in every game except 3, and those, it's not like he got shut down either. 16 touchdowns is massive. We should not see all that much regression in that aspect because like he did have enough red zone looks and enough end zone targets to sustain his touchdown scoring. He might score a couple less because 16 touchdowns receiving is a lot, right? But he's in the offense to get it done with an outstanding quarterback, a great coach, a lot of carryover from one year to the next. So there's continuity there as well. So Cooper Kupp is clearly the number 1 receiver off the board. For me, Justin Jefferson is the wide receiver 2. However, in real money drafts right now, he's being drafted as the wide receiver 3. I would have him at 2. He's got an average draft choice or average draft position of 6.9. Nice. He led the league in air yards last year, and he did it on 168 targets. So that 168 targets is monstrous, right? Like it was 4th in the league. He was 2nd in the league in terms of end zone targets. He is a rising star, only 23 years old. The one thing I noticed about him from watching all the games and everything, every time Justin Jefferson gets targeted, There's no DB within like 5 yards of him. He's got so much separation, even though that doesn't show up in separation stats. A lot of it is like how they scheme him to get open with the routes that he runs. He's an excellent route runner, has the ability to get deep, but can also win it short and intermediate. He is basically a perfect fantasy wide receiver. Again, with a lot of continuity on offense, same quarterback, same situation, not a lot of other pieces added or subtracted that are going to change his market share or his efficiency. So Justin Jefferson is my number 2, even though the field right now I feel is overpaying for Jamar Chase. Jamar Chase is right now being drafted as the wide receiver 2 with an average draft pick 1 slot ahead of Justin Jefferson at 5.8. He's fine. I'm not like, this is not how do I put this? Like, Jamar Chase is absolutely amazing. I'm not saying that he's a bad wide receiver. He just doesn't have the volume or project to have the volume this year for me to want to draft him ahead of Justin Jefferson. So if I'm faced with, I'm going to go with a 0 running back draft and I'm going to take a wide receiver and Cooper Kupp's already off the board and I have a choice of Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase, I'm taking Justin Jefferson just on the projectable volume because it's not likely that Chase gets that amount of targets, at least not consistently. At 128 last year and bumping up to over 160, that's a really massive jump considering the other pieces that they have in this offense. It's not like T. Higgins is not going to command a solid amount of targets. It's not like Tyler Boyd is not a quality wide receiver, and there's only so many targets to go around. And there's also the specter that this team wants to have an identity of being able to run the football, whether that's based on the division that they play in or to try and keep their defense, which is somewhat porous or was last year, off the field a little bit more. So they want to run the football and they have the weapons with which to do it. And they've added 3 big pieces on the offensive line, which will increase the efficiency that Joe Burrow is going to have, but it also could help that running game a ton, which anytime that running game is doing well, that's going to take away plays from Jamar Chase because the more they run it, the more balanced that they are, the less plays they're going to get during a game. Jamar Chase, even with that, is still my wide receiver 3. He's an absolute monster. He's a rising star, best prospect at wide receiver, one of the 5 best prospects ever at wide receiver, let's say over the last 20 years since prospecting has really become an analytics thing. So it's not a knock on Jamar Chase for me. Big time respect for this kid. Absolutely love the talent, but I'm not drafting him ahead of Justin Jefferson. Deebo Samuel is my wide receiver 4. Now, this is based on what he did last year and how they utilized him, which I don't really love the way that they utilized him because targets are worth way more than receptions. If we get the Deebo that we got the beginning of the season, which I don't know if we're going to get anymore, but we know that that's something that they are at least or were willing to do when they were throwing him the ball. That's great. Now, you hand him the ball a lot. It's like, look, he scored all these touchdowns, but those touchdowns weren't being scored from inside the 5-yard line. Those were long-range rushing touchdowns, and those are almost impossible to replicate. There's no stickiness in terms of turning those 25 and 30-yard runs into touchdowns. And the problem is a target is worth 2.8 more fantasy points or times fantasy points than each rush attempt. So we want him to get more targets and less runs. But if they continue along these lines, then I might have to skew this and drop Deebo. But right now, I've got him as my wide receiver 4 because targets, we know that he has that. The touchdown upside with him is absolutely monstrous, both because of his ability to break tackles and rack up yards after the catch, no matter who his quarterback is, whether it's Trey Lance or whether it's going to be Jimmy Garoppolo. We expect it to be Trey Lance, but he was able to rack up 8 touchdowns on the ground. So this 6 touchdowns was really 14 as they look to him to be the linchpin of that San Francisco 49er offense. That is very talented all over the place, but he is the most talented guy that they have. Recently coming off, the ink has not even dried on the 4-year, $104 million extension that Stefon Diggs just received from the Bills. 23 end zone targets, and he turned those into 10 total receiving touchdowns last year. He is being drafted as the wide receiver 7, but he is my wide receiver 5. The Bills offense is what the Bills offense is. And people are really wanting to draft Gabe Davis, thinking that he's going to take a big leap based on what he did in the playoffs, that monstrous game that he had against Kansas City. And they've subtracted a couple of other positions. They've gotten rid of Emmanuel Sanders, and Stefon Diggs he's the constant, right? 103 catches last year, tons of games with over 10 targets, though they do fluctuate because there's a difference. As much as people are high on Gabe Davis and as high as they are on this Buffalo offense in general, Stefon Diggs is really the outside player that's not Josh Allen. Josh Allen's clearly the engine that makes it go. But Steph Diggs is the one who can command the amount of targets that he gets, command that target market share against every team's best corner, against having a defense roll over to his side where everybody else gets to operate in man-to-man or in single coverage, or Cole Beasley throughout the years has just operated in the slot, kind of finding soft spots whenever teams play zone. Steph Diggs has to basically deal with alpha coverage, and he's done a great job with it and will continue to do so moving forward on one of, if not the best offense in the league, with the MVP favorite Josh Allen throwing him the football. If you have not already, go check out, we've got like 5 channels now. As you can see here, we've got the main channel where most of you have come from looking for daily fantasy advice, the Smizzle Games channel, which is basically a spillover for all the games that I like to play, video games, NFT games, all that sort of stuff is on that channel. The fantasy football channel where you are now, the more Smizzle channel, which is where we just put kind of interesting stream conversations that we have. But we have this shorts and clips channel because everybody loves TikToks, IG Reels, and especially YouTube Shorts. So go over there and make sure that you are subscribed to all of the channels on the Smizzle Fantasy Football Network. Davante Adams takes a slide. He was everybody's wide receiver 1 or 2 the last 3 or 4 years, but like I'm not drafting him there anymore. And currently he's being drafted on Underdog with the 9.2 pick and as the wide receiver 4. But a lot of that data was accumulated before he was traded to the Raiders, and I expect that to slide massively. Carr is fine, but he's not Aaron Rodgers, and he does not project to throw as many touchdowns as Aaron Rodgers. And he does not project to throw the ball as many times as Aaron Rodgers coming into this year. They want to establish the run as often as they possibly can. So there's going to be a target drop where he's been like the 1 or 2 guy in the league in terms of targets, and also way overpaced the last 3 seasons on touchdowns from like the 1 or the 2 yard line, snaps that start at the 1 or 2 yard line. That's probably not going to sustain. So this touchdown rate that he's had the last couple of seasons is going to dip. His target rate is going to dip, and he is now dealing with 2 other pass catchers with Darren Waller and Hunter Renfrow, who are going to command targets. So that monstrous 30% level target market share, it's very realistic to think that that is going to sink down to somewhere around 25 or 26, which is still extremely respectable, right? It's not like I've got him down at like my wide receiver 20. I've got him as my wide receiver 6, but like the days of him being drafted as a wide receiver 2, I think, or wide receiver 1 are kind of off the table, at least with the unknown of what his exact target market share is going to be on the Las Vegas Raiders. CeeDee Lamb should see an uptick with Cooper gone. I'm expecting him to add a wide receiver in the draft. We'll see who and if it is. I do expect his targets to jump to around that 150 range. He had 79 catches last year. I expect him to be around the 100 catch range this year as the focal point of this Dallas Cowboys offense. 22 years old, ready to take a really big leap, as they lost some pieces on this offense, and CeeDee Lamb is going to step into those vacated targets pretty easily with his skills both in the slot and able to get separation and be open on the outside. Can win at all 3 levels, short, intermediate, and deep down the field. So big time talent meets big time opportunity going into 2022. So I'm also higher than him on the field versus the field, where the field has him as the wide receiver 9 being drafted 20.7 slot. I have him as my wide receiver 7 and will be drafting him as such. The wide receiver 5 on everybody's list is my wide receiver 8, and it's Tyreek Hill. Again, this is data that was accrued while he was still on Kansas City. I think he's going to take a big step back here in terms of a few things. One, he's not going to get the amount of targets that he got in Kansas City, going from a very pass-heavy offense to a very more balanced offense, right? Also, going from having Patrick Mahomes, who's going to take a lot more shots downfield and be a lot more efficient downfield than most quarterbacks ever, now goes to Tua. And now there's a lot of question marks here, right? So they brought in a brand new coach from San Francisco, their offensive coordinator, who does a good job at running offense, but it's that Deebo Samuel thing where like maybe they're not going to throw him the ball as much and maybe they hand him the ball more, which could make some big plays happen. But on a per play basis, the expected points from a target are way higher than the expected points from a handoff. So if we're replacing Tyreek Hill targets with Tyreek Hill handoffs, that's not great for us in fantasy. Also, if we reduce the efficiency on downfield throws from Mahomes to Tua, that's not great for fantasy. If we realize that Tua has not really had a high average depth of throw, and you have a player like Tyreek Hill whose biggest skill, at least historically, is his ability to get open down the field, that's not great for Tyreek Hill and fantasy. And you have a great dynamic young receiver in Jalen Waddle who could cannibalize some of those targets as well. So a lot of things point to Tyreek Hill not having the fantasy point production on a per game basis or over the course of a season that he's had before. He was 6th in the league in terms of red zone targets. That's probably going to shrink as they're not going to throw it as much. There's a lot of signs pointing to him coming down. He's still in my top 10 as my wide receiver 8, but I'm not going to be drafting him in the top 5 of wide receivers. And he's definitely not going to be drafted in the first round or from me, where currently his draft price is 9.3 on ADP. I wouldn't be drafting him until the second half of the second round. But that's me, and I can change as the off-season draft season goes along, but that's where I'm at in terms of Tyreek Hill. I'm similar to ranking him versus somebody like AJ Brown, where like, think about how you thought about Tyreek Hill being on that Chiefs offense, and think about how you think about AJ Brown being on the Titans offense. You're like, well, AJ Brown's really good and he's going to have big games. He's going to get some targets, but like also the upside just isn't there based on how they run offense. Not as many plays on offense. They run the football first. He will get his targets as he is a target monster, but like the upside on a game in, game out basis is just not there versus if you had like AJ Brown on the Kansas City Chiefs or the Buffalo Bills. So AJ Brown in this spot for me. I think he makes a big rebound from injury. He was an injury plagued last season for him, but they added Robert Woods to this offense, who does well, but is not going to totally cannibalize the things that AJ Brown does, especially filling the role that Julio Jones filled last year. So AJ Brown is in this spot for me. And my wide receiver 10, year in, year out, is just underrated. Keenan Allen, especially for PPR leagues, does nothing but get over 100 catches like all the time. He was 8th in the league in targets, 15 red zone touches, and he finished 11th in fantasy points. And absolutely nothing has changed for this Los Angeles Chargers offense. Big Mike still there on the other side. A couple of other young receivers, Austin Eckler catching balls out of the backfield. We spoke on the running back video about how I don't think that the touchdown receptions for Austin Eckler could be as sticky this year as they were the total that he had last year, because they weren't end zone targets, where Keenan Allen, I'd love to see him get more end zone targets than he got in previous years. But the ascension of Justin Herbert is exactly why I've elevated Keenan Allen to my wide receiver 10. He is currently being drafted as the wide receiver 14. So I'm much higher than the field on him just based on volume alone. It's very predictable in a very good offense with no turnover whatsoever, a good offensive line, and in a division where shootouts are going to happen every single time these teams play, with Russ Wilson and Mahomes and the Raiders adding Adams and having Carr along with the other guys. These teams can score points in the AFC West. So that's like 6 games right there that could have 60 total points in them. And I want to buy in to as much of that as I possibly can. So thank you guys for watching. Look out for another video right there.
He's a legend.